What happens when the most powerful interviewer in the world sits across from the most misunderstood man on the planet and asks the one question she should have left alone? This isn't a story about a celebrity interview. It's a story about silence, about dignity, and about the moment Michael Jackson decided he was done explaining himself. What unfolded that evening would end with a frozen smile, a question left hanging in the air, and a quiet shutdown no one in the studio saw coming. The set didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a living room. Warm amber lamps glowed in the corners, casting long, soft shadows across the beige walls. A fireplace flickered just off camera, the kind of fire that crackles gently, the kind designed to make a guest feel like they were home. Two armchairs sat angled toward each other, close enough for intimacy, far enough for the cameras to slip between them. A small wooden table rested in the space between, and on it, two glasses of water, untouched, catching the lamplight like quiet witnesses. It was a setting built for comfort, supposed to feel safe. Michael Jackson sat in the chair on the right. He wore a deep red military-style jacket, the gold accents catching the light whenever he shifted. Dark slacks, polished shoes, his hair pulled back neatly. His hands were folded in his lap, fingers interlaced, the way a person folds them in church. He spoke softly to a producer, adjusting his microphone, thanking them by name, smiling that small, half-shy smile the world had come to know. His eyes were calm but watchful. The eyes of someone who had been interviewed 1,000 times and knew deep down that every interview was a kind of risk. Across from him in the matching chair sat Oprah Winfrey. She wore a soft cream blouse, her notes resting on her lap, a pen tucked between her fingers. She wasn't smiling, not yet. She wasn't frowning either. Oprah studied him before the cameras even rolled, not warmly, not coldly, just measuring. The way a chess player studies the board before the first move. Behind the cameras, the crew moved quietly, but there was a tension in their movements that didn't match the cozy set. A producer whispered into a headset. Another checked a clipboard twice. Then a third time. Someone adjusted the lighting on Michael's face, then adjusted it again. Everyone in that room knew what this interview could become. 90 million people were going to be watching. 90 million. And Michael, for all his fame, for all his sequins in stadiums and screaming crowds, looked smaller in that chair than anyone had ever seen him look on a stage. Because a stage is where you perform. A chair across from Oprah Winfrey is where you are dissected. The glass of water between them caught the firelight and held it. Neither of them had touched it. Neither of them would, not for a long time. This was the moment before everything. The moment where the world still trusted what it was about to see. And if Michael didn't hold his ground over the next 90 minutes, the most private parts of his life, his face, his body, his friendships, his childhood, were going to be reshaped in real time by the one woman America trusted more than him. Before we go any further into what happened that night, do me a quick favor. Tap that like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this, and drop your current location in the comments. I want to see where in the world you're watching from. Now back to the studio. The red light on the camera blinked on. Oprah's voice softened into that famous warm register, the one millions had fallen asleep to, the one that made strangers feel like old friends. "Michael," she began, smiling now, "thank you for letting me into your world tonight." Michael nodded, his hands still folded neatly in his lap. "Thank you for coming, Oprah. It means a lot." The first questions came easy, the way they always do. Oprah asked about his music, about the new album, about what it felt like to still be writing songs after all these years. Michael answered the way he always did, softly, almost shy, like a man who had never quite gotten used to being asked about himself. He smiled when he talked about melodies. He laughed gently when she asked which of his songs he loved most. "That's like asking a parent to pick a favorite child," he said quietly, and the crew behind the camera chuckled. Oprah moved on to Neverland. She asked about the rides, the animals, the gates, the gardens. Michael's eyes lit up the way they only did when he talked about that place. He described the carousel, the way the music played late into the night, the way children's laughter echoed across the property. "It's the place I built for the child I never got to be," he said. Oprah paused, then leaned in a little. "And what was it like, Michael, growing up the way you did? On stage at 5 years old, traveling the world before you could even ride a bike?" Michael looked down at his hands for a moment. When he looked up again, his voice was even softer than before. "I never really had a childhood, Oprah. The stage was my playground. The microphone was my best friend. I'd watch other kids play in the park from the window of a hotel room, and I'd cry sometimes because I didn't know how to be one of them." The studio went quiet. Somewhere across America, in living rooms from California to Maine, 90 million people leaned closer to their televisions. 90 million. It was the kind of number that didn't feel real until you saw the ratings the next morning. Families had gathered around screens. Phones had stopped ringing. The country, for 90 minutes, was watching one man try to explain himself. And Oprah knew it. She let the silence sit for a moment the way only Oprah could. Then she leaned forward, not aggressively, not loudly, but with that unmistakable shift, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the softer voice that always came right before a harder question. "Michael," she said almost gently, "the world is wondering about something, and I think it's time to talk about it." Michael blinked once. His hands shifted in his lap. "Your skin," Oprah continued, "it's lighter than it used to be. A lot lighter. People have theories. Some kind ones, some not so kind. So I have to ask, what is happening?" The crew behind the camera stilled. A producer in the back held his breath. This was the question America had been waiting years to hear someone ask out loud. Michael's face didn't change, but something in his shoulders softened, the way a person softens when they have explained the same painful thing too many times. "Oprah," he said quietly, "I have a skin disorder. It's called vitiligo. It destroys the pigmentation of the skin. I can't help it. When people make up stories that I don't want to be who I am, it hurts me." He paused, then added, almost apologetically, "It's in my family. My father has it. I'm a Black American. I am proud of my race. I am proud of who I am." The audience, both in the studio and at home, felt the weight of it. There was a quiet sympathy in the air, the kind that follows a confession no one should have had to make on national television. Somewhere in a living room, a mother reached for her remote and turned the volume up. Somewhere else, a teenager stopped scrolling. Oprah's face, though, didn't soften. She didn't nod, she didn't smile, she just listened, the way a person listens when they're already preparing the next question. Michael reached for the glass of water on the small table between them. His fingers closed around it gently. He lifted it halfway, paused, and then set it back down without drinking. The glass returned to its place. The lamplight still caught in it, untouched, and Oprah very quietly drew a small breath. She wasn't done. Oprah let the answer sit for a beat, and she tilted her head, just slightly, the way she always did when she was about to press a little harder. "But Michael," she said, her voice still gentle, still warm, "surely there's more than vitiligo. People look at you and they don't recognize the boy from the Jackson 5. The nose, the jaw, the face, it's different." Behind the camera, a producer shifted uncomfortably. The kind of shift that's small, almost invisible, but loud in a room that quiet. A second producer glanced at his clipboard, then back at the monitor. No one spoke. Michael's eyes didn't drop this time. He looked straight at Oprah, and when he spoke, his voice was so soft you had to lean in to catch it. "Oprah," he said, "I am still that boy. The mirror just changed. The heart didn't." A murmur moved through the audience. Not applause, not yet. Just the sound of a room collectively realizing the man across from Oprah was not going to be rattled the way they had expected. Someone in the back row exhaled audibly. A woman in the front pressed her hand to her chest. Oprah didn't acknowledge it. She nodded once, just enough to seem polite, then moved on. But her pen tapped softly against her notepad, once, twice. The next question was already loaded. "Michael," she said, and this time her voice dropped lower, more intimate, the way a friend leans in to ask something they shouldn't. "I have to ask you something personal, and I hope you don't mind." Michael's hands folded a little tighter in his lap. "Go ahead, Oprah." She paused. The fireplace crackled. The whole studio seemed to lean forward at once. "Are you a virgin, Michael?" A collective intake of breath swept through the room. You could hear it. Audible, sharp like a wave pulling back from the shore. One of the camera operators actually flinched. A producer in the back muttered something under his breath that didn't make it to air. Michael laughed. But the laugh was thin, paper-thin, the kind of laugh a man uses when he doesn't know what else to do with his face. "Oprah," he said, shaking his head slowly, "how could you ask me that? I'm a gentleman." It wasn't an answer. It was a wall, politely built, but a wall all the same. Oprah smiled. "I had to ask. People want to know." "Some things," Michael said quietly, "are private." The word landed soft, but it stayed in the air. "Private." He said it the way a man says a word he has had to say too many times. He reached for the glass of water again. His fingers brushed the rim. He didn't lift it. He just touched it, as if to remind himself it was still there. Then his hand returned to his lap. Oprah let the silence stretch. She was good at silences. She knew how to use them. And then, with the same careful softness, she pivoted again. "Michael, I want to talk about Neverland for a moment. The sleepovers." Michael's jaw shifted, just barely. "Yes, you understand why people question it," Oprah said, and her tone shifted into something she would have called concerned curiosity. But anyone watching could feel the edge underneath. Grown men don't usually invite children to sleepover. Parents at home are wondering, Michael. They're wondering what to make of it. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't really quiet at all, because you could hear the hum of the lights, the faint crackle of the fire, the breath of the woman in the second row. Michael's hands folded tighter in his lap, his knuckles going pale against the dark fabric of his slacks. He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the glass of water, then up at the camera, then finally at Oprah. "When I was a child," he said slowly, deliberately, every word placed with care, "no one let me be one. I worked, I performed, I missed every birthday party, every sleepover, every ordinary thing other children get to have. So I built a place where children could be children, where they could ride the carousel at midnight, where they could watch movies and eat popcorn and laugh until they fell asleep on the floor." He paused. His voice didn't rise. It got quieter. "There is nothing beyond that." The applause that followed was hesitant, but it was real. It started in the back, a few hands, then more, and then a wave of it rolled through the studio. Not loud, not triumphant, just the sound of a room that had heard something honest and didn't quite know what to do with it. Oprah waited for the applause to die down. She smiled that practiced smile and opened her mouth to ask the next question. But Michael spoke first. "Oprah," he said softly, and something in his tone made her pause. "Can I ask you something?" She blinked, the pen in her hand stilled. "Of course, Michael." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled. The cameras held their breath. "When you look at me," he said, "do you see a man trying to heal something, or do you only see what the headlines told you to see?" It was the first time all evening that Oprah's face did something it wasn't supposed to do. Her smile didn't drop, not exactly, but her eyes flickered, just for a half second, and she blinked twice in quick succession, the way a person blinks when they have been caught doing something they didn't think anyone noticed. She recovered fast, almost instantly. The smile came back, the posture corrected itself, but the camera caught it, and the audience saw it, and Michael very quietly sat back in his chair. The producers should have moved on. Everyone in the studio felt it. The mirror question Michael had asked still hung in the air, unanswered, and the room was waiting for Oprah to do what good interviewers do: soften, pivot, return to safer ground. But Oprah had one more question, the one she had been holding since the cameras rolled, the one she had written down twice in her notes, underlined once and circled. She leaned in, her voice dropped into something gentle, almost maternal, but underneath it the edge was unmistakable. "Michael," she said softly, "do you think a grown man sharing his bed with a child who isn't his own is appropriate?" The room froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. The fire stopped crackling, or maybe it didn't, but no one heard it anymore. A producer in the back put a hand over his mouth. The woman in the front row who had pressed her hand to her chest earlier now lowered it slowly, as if she had forgotten she was breathing. Michael didn't speak for a long moment. He looked down at his hands. He turned them over, palms up, then folded them again. He looked at the glass of water on the table. He looked at the fire, and then finally he looked up at Oprah. His eyes were calm, but something behind them had changed. The shyness was gone. The apologetic softness that had carried him through the first hour was gone. What remained was something quieter and harder, the look of a man who had just decided he was done. "Oprah," he said, and his voice was lower than it had been all evening. "I have given my music to heal people. I have given my money to heal children. I have given my whole life trying to fix what was broken in me when I was small." He paused. The pause was long. Long enough for the studio to feel it in their chests. "And now you ask me that. Like the answer was ever going to satisfy anyone." Oprah's smile faltered. She recovered, but slower this time. The practiced grace took an extra half-second to return. "Michael," she said, "I'm just asking what people want to know." Michael shook his head, just once. The movement was so small you almost missed it. "Oprah," he said quietly, "you're not asking what people want to know. You're asking what people want to believe." A gasp moved through the studio. Then silence. Then somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands started to clap. Then another. Then a wave of it, hesitant but growing. Scattered applause that didn't know whether it was allowed but couldn't help itself. Oprah's pen stopped moving on her notepad. She opened her mouth. "Michael, I just want to be clear that I'm not no," Michael said, and the word was so soft it almost didn't count as an interruption. "Please." Oprah closed her mouth. Michael sat forward, just slightly, not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough to close the distance between them. "This isn't an interview anymore, Oprah. This is a trial, and I never agreed to be on trial in my own life." The room didn't move. "You've questioned my face," he continued, and his voice stayed even, never rising, never sharpening. "You've questioned my body. You've questioned my friendships. And now you've questioned my intentions. There is nothing left of me you haven't touched." Oprah's posture loosened. It was a small thing, but the cameras caught it. The way her shoulders dropped half an inch. The way her hands, which had been so composed, drifted slightly apart on her notepad. She had lost something in that moment, and she knew it. "Michael," she said, and her voice had less of that warm authority now. "I'm being fair." Michael looked at her. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, he just looked. "Fair," he said almost in a whisper, "would be letting me be a human being before you make me a headline." The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights. Somewhere across America, in living rooms from California to Maine, 90 million people sat motionless in front of their televisions. A father lowered his beer. A grandmother set down her knitting. A teenager who had been half listening from the kitchen walked into the living room and stood in the doorway watching. Michael straightened in his chair, his hands folded again but tighter this time. The shy man from the beginning of the interview was gone. In his place sat someone none of them had ever seen on television before. Not the performer, not the icon, just a man who had finally run out of patience for being misunderstood. "I came here to give you the truth, Oprah," he said. "But the truth doesn't matter when the question is already an accusation." That was the line, the one that would be replayed for years, the one that would be quoted in articles and documentaries and books long after the night was over. He didn't walk out. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stopped answering. He folded his hands in his lap, sat back in his chair, and turned his face slightly, just enough to look directly into the camera, past Oprah, past the producers, past the studio walls, to the 90 million people watching at home. Oprah, to her credit, tried to recover. She glanced at her notes. She lifted her pen. She opened her mouth to ask one more question, a softer one, a way back in. "Michael, if I could just," he shook his head gently, "the way you shake your head at someone you don't want to embarrass." "No more." "Oprah," he said, "not tonight." And just like that, the most powerful interviewer in the world had nothing left to say. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. We tell these stories every week. And while you're down there, comment your current location so I can see where in the world you're watching from. Now stay with me, because what happens after the cameras stop rolling is the part nobody talks about. The cameras kept rolling. They had to. There were still minutes left in the segment, still a runtime to fill, still an audience of 90 million people sitting in their living rooms, waiting for whatever came next. But the energy in the room was gone. Whatever had been alive in that studio, the tension, the chase, the careful dance of question and answer had quietly died in Michael's lap when he folded his hands. Oprah tried to soften. She was a professional, and she knew what professionals do when a moment gets away from them. She smiled, found her warmth again, and pivoted. "Michael," she said gently, "tell me about the new tour. The fans are so excited." Michael answered, politely, briefly, "It's going to be wonderful, Oprah. The fans always give me everything. I just try to give it back." She asked about the music, about the choreography, about the children's charities he was supporting that year. He answered all of it the same way. Short sentences, soft voice. The warmth was gone, but so was the war. He wasn't punishing her. He just wasn't reaching for her anymore. In the back of the studio, a producer pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece and whispered something into his headset. A moment later, the floor director's voice came through the chain. "Wrap it up." Oprah heard it. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Then she turned back to the camera, the way she had 1,000 times before, and gave it that closing smile, the one America knew, the one that had ended every show she had ever hosted. "Michael Jackson, everyone." Polite applause filled the studio. Not the wild kind, not the kind that follows a triumph, just the kind that follows the end of something heavy. Michael nodded once. Then he stood slowly. The way a man stands after sitting through something he won't forget. He didn't reach for Oprah's hand right away. He just looked at her for a long moment, a moment longer than was comfortable, a moment that said more than any final question could have. Then he reached for the glass of water on the table, the one that had sat between them all night, untouched, catching the lamplight. He lifted it carefully, took one small sip, the first of the entire interview, and set it back down gently. The glass made a soft sound against the wood, a sound everyone in the front row heard. "Thank you for having me, Oprah." She looked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been all night. "Thank you, Michael." He turned. He walked off the set. No final speech. No flourish. No backward glance. Just the soft sound of his shoes against the studio floor and the rustle of his red jacket as he disappeared past the cameras. There was no applause this time. Just silence. The silence of a room that knew it had just witnessed something it didn't deserve. There was no walk-off speech. No standing ovation. Just a man who had spent his whole life being asked to prove he was human, and who, for one quiet moment, refused to keep proving it. The interview aired to 90 million people. They watched the music questions, the Neverland questions, the skin question, the virgin question, the bed question. They watched all of it. But the part everyone remembered, the part that lived on long after the credits rolled, wasn't the answer. It was the silence after the question. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a defense. It's the refusal to keep defending yourself to people who already made up their minds. If you believe Michael Jackson handled that moment with more grace than most of us ever could, tap that like button to show your respect. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where the quiet ones speak the loudest. And one more time, drop your current location in the comments. I love seeing where in the world this story is reaching. Tell me, did Michael do the right thing by shutting it down? Or should he have answered the question and faced it head on? Let me know below. I'll see you in the next one.